Good afternoon, everyone. This is the 17th meeting of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports to council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request of any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact sppc@london.ca. For those joining us remotely, I'm joined by Councillor Fife Millar, Councillor Cassidy, Councillor Lehman, Councillor Hamu, and Councillor Lewis here in chambers. We do have quorum, and I will look to committee for disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to declare any pecuniary interest with any items related to the London Public Library, as my spouse is now an employee at the LPL.
Perfect. Congratulations to her as an LPL board member. Looking for any other disclosures of pecuniary interest from committee? Okay. Seeing none, we have no items for consent. Our scheduled items tonight is a public participation meeting regarding the multi-year budget for 2022. The format for this evening will be to open the PPM, close the PPM, and then receive submissions. This isn't set up to be a conversation regarding the budget. That happens on the 2nd. So looking to committee for a motion to open the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Hillier, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. The vote will now be opening in eScribe.
I'll vote manually, yay.
Thank you.
Councillor Hopkins?
I haven't received it, but I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 13-0.
We do have guests phoning in virtually to join us, and we're anticipating some in committee rooms 1 or 2. So I'm going to start off with someone on the phone, and then I'll rotate to committee room and back and forth as participants remain. So starting on the phone, to everyone participating this evening, it is being live streamed. So feel free to reference exactly what in the budget you would like us to consider, or overall feedback is also appreciated. Each speaker joining us this evening has 5 minutes to make their points and submissions, and anyone who submitted anything in writing, it is on our added agenda item as well. So we have that before us if you would just like to reference it. We do have it in front of us. So starting us off this evening, joining us by phone, I would like staff to unmute Ms. Devine. Please proceed once we are connected.
Hi, am I connected?
Yeah, you're perfect. Please proceed. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, council members. Thank you for allowing me this time to speak with you today. I know this is about budget, but I'd like to start with some statistics. Between April 2020 and March 2021, Statistics Canada estimated approximately 11,000 people residing on the streets of London, Ontario. Of the estimated 23 to 67% are suffering from mental health issues. A large number of homeless attempt to escape the emotional impact of being homeless to opioid use, and this has resulted in a 66% increase in overall overdose-related deaths. Between January and October of 2021, that's a 44-week period, there was a reported 46 opioid deaths, one right on the front step of the building I reside in. That's more than one opioid death per week on the streets of London. In addition to allocating tax income to this issue, London Council should also strongly think about insisting new developers agree to renting 10 to 15% of their total units at affordable cost as outlined by our own federal government, not landlords' choice of affordability. That is in no way addressing the actual issue, not just here in London, but throughout Canada. I made this suggestion to a member of the committee currently looking into inclusionary housing, and his response was, developers won't build if we insist on such things. And to that, I'd like to say, that's fine. We don't want these developers in our city. They're not interested in London. They're only interested in taking money away from London. There are developers who will agree to these terms and contribute good to our city. Those are the developers London wants and needs. If these changes are implemented for developers, more budget dollars can be used to fund other housing issues with projects such as permanent tiny home communities built within using converted shipping crates, putting research into future 3D printed homes. In countries such as Mexico, a 3D printed community was successfully created for citizens experiencing poverty. Also, there's a certain percentage of people that, for their individual personal reasons, choose to live outside. They fall into a category of unhousable. For those unhousable, the current designated tent areas should remain indefinitely, not just until COVID ends. This will help keep tents off the city sidewalks and out of the public parks. Resources such as mental health and addiction services should be made available nearby these communities. To help the population, the city could also use funds to develop items such as this cart. The city could enlist local workshops to help develop these carts. They contain the basic shelter needs. All the carts would be assigned an agreement that they could only reside in the designated tent areas. They can be used during the day to gather their normal collection of needs and stuff, and then when they're sleeping and stuff, they would return to the designated areas. These are the issues that our tax dollars should be budgeted for, not for making the city pretty with cobblestone streets and fancy storefronts. I do understand tourism is a large part of London's survival, but honestly, council members, what does it say about London when tourists see our cobblestone streets and fancy doorways filled with homeless people sleeping or begging for change? If we address the housing situation, that would also address the mental health issue and the drug issues that London is also facing as a whole, as a lot of one stems from the other down the line. Thank you for allowing me this time and bringing these concerns before you.
Thank you for joining us tonight and for staying within your time allotment. Thank you kindly, and hopefully you'll be back again when it's time for more public participation. Thank you. Looking to committee room 1 or 2 to see if anyone's there to speak in person. No? Perfect. Thank you for that. We will continue with our phone participants then. Moving on to Ms. Olivier. Please proceed once you're unmuted.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you for joining us, and you have 5 minutes. Please proceed.
Awesome, thank you. So good afternoon to all council members. My name is Eunice Oladejo, and I'm the Vice President of External Affairs at the University Students' Council at Western. And thanks for the opportunity to speak today. So for those that don't know, the University Students' Council represents just under 30,000 students, and we advocate for issues important to our student body. So for many years, we've been involved in the budget process and have provided the student perspective and input and feedback to the city. Furthermore, I'd like to highlight a few key points that are important to our students. The first is the importance of adopting gender-based analysis when considering policy changes and initiatives. So we are very pleased to see steps taken towards this approach through the new environmental, socioeconomic equity impact and governance considerations, or the ESG considerations, as the inclusion of these considerations will allow our community members and counselors to adopt a critical lens in thinking equitably when evaluating budget amendments and recommendations. And it also allows for greater attention to be given to the intersectionalities of our community members. However, we would like to see these ESG considerations expanded to further build on gender-based analysis and considerations for the safety of women and girls. In the 2019 Student Voices on Sexual Violence Survey, 71.6% of respondents from Western disclosed experiencing sexual harassment. Although some of these experiences occur on campus, they also do occur off of campus, so this is a community issue. In the previous budget update, the strategic area focus titled Creating a Safe London for Women and Girls did not receive additional investments in the 2020 to 2023 update, and there's been no change in the current budget update. Although we are glad to see advancements through the ESG considerations, we believe that the city can go further to bridge the gaps that women and girls are subject to in the community. And I'll also quickly add that it's very important for this work to be done in consultation with experts within the field to ensure that we're not missing the mark. Secondly, environmental sustainability is an issue very important to our students, and our Student Council is pleased to see many budget updates regarding the city's sustainability goals. Specifically, we are in support of the proposed recommendation regarding the zero emission bus implementation strategy, and therefore we'd like to see City Council adopt this recommendation. However, another very pressing issue for our students has to do with composting. The 60% waste diversion action plan reflects strong support for the implementation of a green bin composting program, and our students in particular are very eager to see this program being implemented. Therefore, we are worried that in the 2021 property tax, water, wastewater, and treatment multi-year budget amendment, the City of London decreased the funding for the 60% waste diversion action plan by 1.45 million. The USC recognizes the financial constraints that the city is facing and is concerned that the green bin composting program will not be implemented within the 2020 to 2023 multi-year budget cycle. We are also very concerned that should costs associated with the program increase and require more significant investments than anticipated, the program may therefore not be implemented in future multi-year budget cycles. Therefore, the USC affirms its support for a green bin composting program and also urges the city to begin the implementation process during this current budget cycle. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us and that insightful feedback from students. Hopefully you'll join us again in the future. Turning to our next speaker on the phone, I would like staff to unmute Ms. Valastro. And when ready, please proceed. You have 5 minutes.
Every year since COVID, you've been asked not to raise property taxes because people are struggling. And COVID didn't hit everyone equally, but it did hit some people hard. And this year, there's deep inflation, which does hit everybody hard. And the request is coming in again, not to raise property taxes, to hold the property taxes. And the city should be able to hold their spending to alleviate pressures on homeowners. You keep talking about these averages, what the average household is going to pay. It sounds small. But it's not small. If you have a bigger house, or if your house, if you're income poor, these make a big difference, and people struggle to keep their houses. So it's been 2 years now, and now we're still in COVID, plus we have deep inflation, and the city should find a way to hold their budget and hold the property taxes as they are. I also want to comment on the Green Bin project. The Green Bin project, London has a lot of single-family homes which could compost on site, and the Green Bin waste diversion program really should focus on places where they can't compost on site. High-rises, but there's really no reason why the city can't initiate a compost on site like for example, we compost on site. We would not participate in a green bin waste diversion because we have places to compost and then we use our compost. That should be something that should be encouraged, as a lot of people here in the city have single-family homes. And that might be a way to initiate the program by encouraging on-site compost. I also wish to lend support to a proposal that's been brought forward to stop cutting, a way to reduce a budget is to stop cutting grass in certain areas of the city, which other cities have done and have had positive ecological impacts, because where they stop cutting, they actually become naturalized, which increases small species, grassland species, which in turn invites raptors back into a city. That's what happened in the city of Toronto. They stopped cutting like 15 years ago, and it's had a positive ecological impact. So that's a support for that budget cut. And in addition, you should consider cutting pesticide use. The city currently uses pesticides around the ponds and High Park, around the ponds. There's ways to alleviate mosquitoes through natural plantings. And every time you get rid of mosquitoes, you also, maybe you don't understand that mosquitoes feed a lot of other species, like birds, like swallowtails are dependent on mosquitoes, amphibians are dependent on mosquitoes. And so you should consider cutting the use of pesticides as a budget item, and also it would have positive ecological impacts as well. So I'm asking you not to raise property taxes. You've been asked every single year for the last 2 years not to raise property taxes. It hurts, and people struggle to keep their houses, and you should find a way to hold your budget, just like any other household holds their budget when they're hurting financially. I expect council and the city to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us and for that feedback. It will be considered. Our next guest joining us via phone, I would like staff to unmute Mr. Hope.
Thank you, and good evening, councillors. My name is Ronald Hope, he, him, and I am a volunteer at Antler River Rally and am a mature student in the community-based learning course, a part of the Social Justice and Peace Studies program at King's. I am here tonight to speak in reference to a letter submitted by Antler River Rally that is signed by various environmental organizations in the city. But I am also here to talk about my own lived experience of Deshkun-Zibi Thames River and how, as a settler allies, we can build better relationships with local Indigenous communities. As I was born in London, but raised in Woodstock, just a short bike ride away from Deshkun-Zibi, near Piddock Conservation Area, I was always appalled to hear that adults would tell us not to swim or eat the fish we caught in Deshkun-Zibi after a good day of fishing. As a father of 2 boys, I want my children to be able to fish and swim safely in Deshkun-Zibi. That is why I am here to support the letter and staff's recommended 2022 wastewater and treatment budget amendments, which will see more funding going to eliminating sewage, bypasses, and overflows. As council members, you will remember that on September 30th of this year, the City of London observed the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. While the day holds symbolic importance, the symbolism must be followed up with real change. Just days after the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, 60 million liters of sewage was released into Deshkun-Zibi. Ongoing problems of sewage in the river compromises the ecological health of the river and contributes to boil water advisories at Oneida, First Nation of the Thames, Chippewas of the First Nations of the Thames, and Munsee Delaware Nation. Remedying the problem of raw sewage as quickly as possible is thus paramount to ensuring a safe supply of drinking water for First Nations communities, which is a stated goal of the London Plan and the cornerstone of the Crown's treaty obligations. The health of the relationships between allied settlers and Indigenous people is contingent on the health of the land on which these relationships are built. We must do everything in our power to restore the river to its pre-colonial health and to explore opportunities for the collaboration on common objectives. The TRC calls for action number 43 states that we call upon the city municipal government to fully adopt and implement the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples as the framework of reconciliation. This call is important as UN DRIP lays out specific rights of Indigenous people as those rights pertain to land and water. Articles 24, 25, and 26 of the UN DRIP to be exact. Environmentalism and truth and reconciliation are inseparable, just as Deshkanzibi flows through our collective history. Our relationship to the river will determine our future as a city and our collective goal to honor our treaty obligations and follow and forge a new path forward that is built on respect, tolerance, and healing. I hope you will adopt staff's recommendation, and I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Hope, and for that feedback. Going to our next speaker on the phone, if staff could unmute Mr. Levin, recognizing he has 5 minutes when he's ready to proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to speak very briefly about the first item in my submission. I'll leave the second submission for council's consideration. I'm asking a very simple request for a very small amount of money that wouldn't even have a tax impact. That being $100,000 annually for 2022 and 2023 to put more boots on the ground in the contract that the city has with the Upper Thames to manage 12 of its environmentally significant areas. Right now, there are 4 members of the ESA management team, and frankly, there needs to be more. For those of you listening who may not be familiar with that contract, the Upper Thames staff regularly visit our environmentally significant areas to do things such as invasive species control, which is part of the recommendation from staff for the use of a reserve fund for that purpose. I'm suggesting the same reserve fund could be used. The ESA team also creates and maintains the trail system, repairs and replaces bridges and staircases and boardwalks, and does hazard tree assessment and tree removal. It installs signs and trail markers and removes garbage. And it also enforces the rules within the environmentally significant areas because they are designated as provincial offenses officers. So it's an excellent contract that the city has had in place for a number of years. And I would say because of COVID, more Londoners have discovered and are using our environmentally significant areas. And as a result, I think it's a very important move by the council to make a very small additional investment in protecting these environmentally significant areas. As I've suggested in my submission, there would be no tax implication to drawing $100,000 in 2022 and 2023 from an existing reserve fund, which is actually very well funded. So I leave you with that thought, and hopefully council will move forward on this suggestion. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of SPPC.
Thank you, Mr. Levin, for joining us this evening. I will now turn to Ms. Frank for her comments, recognizing she also has 5 minutes, and please proceed when you're ready.
Excellent. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, councillors, and thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today about the budget update. My name is Skylar Frank, and I'm the president of the Urban League of London Board of Directors. And I'm speaking to the letter that was submitted to the PPM on behalf of the Urban League Board, and that letter can be found on your added agenda. So if you want to pull it up, feel free. League members have found a lot of value in the city's neighborhood services, and we really love working with city staff to help make vibrant communities. It's a lot of the work that the league does and a lot of the work that our members do. So the Neighborhood Decision-Making Fund and the Neighborhood Special Events Fund really help make so many of these events and projects happen. And in fact, we actually awarded the Green Brick Award to the Kiwanis Park Natural Playground this year, and they were a neighborhood decision-making grant winner a couple years ago, and they're a really great example of how we can use and leverage some funding to really connect the community and to have a community-driven project happen in local neighborhoods. So we respectfully encourage council to reject the reduction to Neighborhood Decision-Making Fund as well as the Neighborhood Special Events Fund. All that being said, We would also encourage council to direct staff to complete an equity review of the neighborhood decision-making program, because we have heard a lot of community feedback that the progress is not necessarily equitable across the city, as wealthier neighborhoods are more able to organize and mobilize to acquire the funds for those projects. And we don't necessarily think that cutting the funds would make the funding more equitable. We think, in fact, more money would be great, although maintaining is just fine. But we do think that it requires some sort of equity review so that wealthier neighborhoods aren't the ones that are always continuing to get improvements in their communities. So we would encourage maintaining the Neighborhood Decision-Making Fund and Small Events Fund. And we also, as outlined in the letter, encourage council to reject amendment P6, so the permanent decrease of $600,000 from the infrastructure gap fund. Long-term deficits and infrastructure improvements have already made London vulnerable to many issues, and we'd actually encourage council to set aside that $600,000 towards a climate change fund for future use. We understand that reducing the $600,000 from the infrastructure gap is not going to have a material impact on shrinking that gap. I think it was a 0.03% increase. So we think that taking that $600,000, which was intended for infrastructure, and putting it towards a climate change fund, which we noticed there wasn't in this budget update, would be a really good use of that funds. And finally, we also would like to say we really appreciate the continued effort that staff have put into making sure there are more equity and sustainability lenses applied to the budget process. And we'd encourage city staff to go even further with that analysis. Right now, for example, it looked like the environmental considerations and the equity considerations are only being applied to the business cases, which makes sense since that's what this update is. But for example, with the environmental considerations, the biggest emissions are going to be coming from the core capital and operating budgets, and it didn't really look like those were analyzed throughout this process. So going even further and trying to apply those equity and sustainability lenses, I think will improve the rigor of making these decisions about funding and where to allocate it. So thank you very much for the time to speak, and to all the work that city staff have put into making this budget update, as well as to council for the consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Frank, for joining us this evening and speaking on behalf of the Urban League. Looking to staff to see if there is anyone who's joined us in committee rooms 1 or 2. No one? Looking to the clerk to see if anyone else is on the phone that we're anticipating. Seeing a no for that. Looking to committee for a mover and a seconder to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Hamou. Calling the question and e-scribe.
Just voting manually, yay.
Chair, Ed Holder, I'll vote yes.
Thank you. The vote is open.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
We now have the opportunity to accept the communications as submitted by the community. Looking for motion to receive items 3.1 A through I. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, calling the question and e-scribe.
Councillor Sell.
Again, Mayor Holder voting yes.
Councillor Van Holst.
I'll have to vote yes. There seems to be some trouble with the program here.
Thank you. Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Thank you. I have no items for direction. We have no deferred matters. Looking to committee for additional business. I have not been made aware of any. Okay, in regards to the budget, we will meet again on December 2nd for a full day meeting. Please get any votes you would like to be called separately or pecuniary interest in writing in advance to the clerks, just to help make our day flow smoother. Thank you to the public for joining us this evening and to our speakers who have given of their time and their feedback to us. I will need a mover and a seconder for adjournment. Moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Van Merbergen. The vote is opening in eScribe.
Chair, I'll vote yes. Thank you.
Chair, I'll vote yes as well, Councillor Sully.
I will also vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Welcome to still share their feedback with their counselors in writing or via phone. So please do reach out, and thank you everyone for your time. And I will see you for another great meeting on December 2nd.